Greetings fellow Netrunners. Today, this entire video will be dedicated to an upcoming card, Political Operative, and how it impacts the CORP side. Now, I know this card is not going to come out anytime soon. It's going to come out in Pack 3, Democracy and Dogma. However, since it will most likely shape the meta for at least part of the regional season, I think it's quite important to look at it now, especially since it has already been spoiled for quite some time. Now, Political Operative is a very strong card in my opinion, and it's going to see prevalent play. You know it will be. The play testers think so too, because clearly they've decided to print this as an alt art card for the upcoming spring GNK pack. So if they're printing it as an alt art, they are definitely expecting people to play it quite a bit. So yeah, be prepared. This card is going to make an entrance, and this video will cover how it impacts the upgrades and assets that corps play right now, and which archetypes are affected by it the most, as well as what kind of counterplays there exist to Political Operative. But first, for the benefit of those who don't really keep up with spoilers, let's cover what this card does. Polop is a criminal resource that is a connection. It is 1 to install and has 1 influence. It can only be installed if a successful run on HQ was made in the same turn, and its ability is what really defines it. You may trash a rezzed asset or upgrade on the corp side simply by paying its trash cost and by trashing Political Operative. So you notice immediately there's something missing on the resource. That is the click cost. That's because there's no click cost. This is an instant speed ability, and this is really what makes it so powerful. Because this sets a whole new precedent. Previously, to trash assets or upgrades of the corp, the runner has to spend clicks, be it a click to run, a click to play drive-by, or 2 clicks rather, or perhaps spending a click to play 2 clicks also to play to use unregistered SNW35. Now, you no longer need to pay the click cost to get rid of upgrades and assets. This has 3 main ramifications. Firstly, you can fire this on the corp's turn. Secondly, you can fire this during a run. Third, which means that you get more mileage out of your 4 clicks on your turn, because you don't have to spend a click to destroy any assets or upgrades during your turn, unlike with drive-by or SNW. Thirdly, by elevating this to a paid speed ability, what we are in fact doing is setting this as the gold standard, the bar to beat. Other slower corp assets and upgrades, such as those that require clicks to fire, or cards that don't fire on paid ability windows, get a lot worse because now they are very vulnerable to Polop. So which assets and upgrades are immune to Polop and which are vulnerable? Let's find out in the next section. For your assets and upgrades to compete against Polop's paid ability speed, they must rival its speed, meaning that your upgrades and assets must fire during paid ability windows. So, most obviously, anything with a trash cost is good. Something like Marcus, Betty, and Keegan Lane. Those will be defensive upgrades that are not affected by Polop at all, because when the runner makes a run on the server with that upgrade, you simply res the upgrade and immediately trash it to fire. There is no window for the runner to fire Polop until you pass priority over to the runner. So those cards are good. Cyberdex, Jackson Howard, and Unres Jackson Howard is also good because it doesn't have a trash ability, but it does have a remove Jackson from the game ability. So if you have agendas and archives and you have an Unres Jackson, it's good. If they run archives, you can fire Jackson without Polop interrupting you, and they cannot use Polop to trash an Unres Jackson. The other thing that fires during paid ability windows is agenda scoring as well. Agenda scoring also takes place during paid ability windows. This is why you are able to score an Astro script even against a clone chip clot. So anything that fires off during agenda scores is good. Most notably, Shift Division's team sponsorship, as well as Sansan Grid. Now, Sansan Grid is technically a constant ability. All agendas on Sansan are constantly have the -1 advancement requirement. However, for most purposes, you're using Sansan to score agendas during the scoring window. So for the most part, Sansan is immune to Polop and unres Sansan. Once the Sansan is res, you have to respect the fact that the runner can simply trash Polop while you're trying to score your next agenda. Ambushes are also good because they don't need to be res, hence they are not affected by Polop. In fact, some ambushes don't need to be installed at all, such as Snare. Cyberdeck straddles between the two. It is a paid ability in that you can trash it to purge viruses, and it has an ambush component of accessing to purge as well. So all these cards are more or less immune to Polop. Basically, every other asset and upgrade that I did not cover in the previous section are vulnerable to Polop. That being said, because Polop is an exhaustible resource, which means that the runner can only use it a finite number of times, the runner won't use it on every single asset or upgrade you res, so most assets and upgrades still won't be affected. Most likely, a smart runner will only use Polop on high value targets. So for assets and upgrades, you can generally categorize them by two qualities. Firstly, by their replaceability. Looking at the top row, Pet Campaign and DBS are classified under replaceable because they make winning the game easier, but they are by no means necessary. Sure, you draw your cards faster and you get more credits with them resed. However, even if you don't have them, you simply spend more clicks to draw up cards to get money until you can score your agendas for the win. So most likely, the runner will not expend their precious Polop on replaceable cards, whereas irreplaceable cards are cards that have a unique effect, like Hokusai Grid, triggering, protecting a server, or Genetics Pavilion, which has a very unique effect of slowing down the runner by forcing them to only draw a certain number of cards at maximum a turn. These cards are more high value and are more likely to be trashed by the runner. Then we look at the other axis. How much impact does trashing a card with Polop have? This is a bit harder to evaluate. This mostly comes down to the board state. You can't classify cards strictly into one or the other. But looking on the left column, Pet Campaign and DBS are considered to be low immediate impact because they pay off in drip. They're drip cards, so they pay off over the long run. Trashing them immediately with Polop has a very small effect, even though it adds up over time. In contrast, there are high impact cards such as Grindel Refinery, which can easily swing the credit lead in the Corp's favor, or Amazon Industrial Grid, maybe a high impact card because forcing more ice reses could be very dangerous for the runner, especially if those ice reses happen to be next ice. So trashing these high impact cards with Polop are much better for the runner because they prevent the Corp from going out of control. Their high immediate impact is negated, which means that you are basically getting more value out of your Polop trash. So all these cards that I'm showing you here are not really cards that you would trash with Polop. Of course, this is very subjective to each individual game. For example, you obviously trash a Hokusai Grid if it would otherwise lead to your flatlining. But as the runner generally, what you really want to target are cards that would fall under the bottom right category. Those marked by the exclamation marks, irreplaceable and have a high immediate impact, which usually means that this refers to cards that have a direct impact on the win condition of both sides. Usually this means a swing in number of agenda points, or something that prevents a flat line for the runner. Those are some very good reasons to fire off Polop, and as the Corp, preparing and playing against Polop, you want to identify cards that fall under this exclamation mark category so you can be prepared when Polop is eventually played against you. So now let's look at individual Corp archetypes and what sort of upgrades and assets are most affected by the existence of Polop. Let's start by looking at one of the most well-established archetypes in recent Netrunner history. That's the 2015 Winning World deck, which is Dan Diagenio's Food Codes. So Food Codes basically tries to get a lot of money in the early game between the asset economy with Breaker Bay and Hedge Fund and the ID ability. This allows you to rest a lot of ice, which translates into a super effective Caprice and Ash combo that allows you to score agendas unhindered in remotes. So when you're a runner playing Polop against this deck, do you attempt to trash? Which part of the chain do you attempt to cut? You can either cut out the money or cut out the defensive upgrades. Clearly, when I picture it like this, it's very obvious that it's much easier to cut the upgrades because there are only 2 upgrades, maybe 5 cards in the Corp's deck that can keep you off the remote. Whereas, as for economy, There are so many cards, at least 9, maybe even 12 cards in the deck dedicated to gaining money, and that doesn't include the ID ability, which is always turned on. So obviously you hit at Caprice and Ash, which arguably makes these two upgrades the most affected corp cards, cards most affected by Polop. Now some of you viewers might be thinking, well, that's good. This means that with less Caprice and Ash being played, maybe we can see a greater diversity of defensive upgrades being played by everyone. Well, sorry to tell you Jank players, but unfortunately, there is a lot of crossfire collateral damage, and I'm about to present them to you right now. Basically, almost every defensive upgrade is hosed by Polop. This mostly stems from the nature of most defensive upgrades. They are usually constant abilities that always apply when the runner is making a run on a certain server, or abilities that trigger when the runner passes a certain point, such as when they pass the final piece of ice, or when they make a successful run. All these are greatly affected by Polop, and yeah, you basically won't see more of these cards. Highline Grid, it's just going to get trashed when the runner wants to spend clicks to make a run. Will of the Wisp, you're not going to bury any programs with it. Before you get to fire it, Polop will fire first. So these are cards that just cannot compete with the paid instant ability speed of Polop. And contrary to what you might think, this doesn't mean that you see greater variety of Glacial decks. Instead, now Glacial decks have to try to force Polop out on another asset or upgrade before they can try to score agendas, or they simply have to try to score agendas behind ice. Either way, this makes life a lot harder for Glacial archetypes relying on upgrade support, and as a direct result, such archetypes will be nerfed heavily with the introduction of Polop. Now I know that some of you are very creative and innovative janky deck builders. You'll say, hey, I don't have to score upgrades agendas in remotes. I can instead place an asset in a remote, a key asset that will prevent the runner from disrupting my agenda scoring. Well, sorry to tell you, but if you're trying to rely on assets that enable your agendas to be scored, those are affected by Polop as well. Imagine an IT department loaded with 15 power counters, or maybe a blacklist that is preventing the runner from levying and they have no more cards in the deck. For all the effort that you took to set up that powerful secure remote, the runner can simply kill your asset with a fraction of effort using Polop. And this is done at instant speed as well. This means that any agendas that you're trying to score with the Director Haas or the Mumbag construction grid that you thought you had now are lying on the table, very vulnerable to the runner trashing next turn. Stealing next turn. This is a big problem, isn't it? Corporate Town is in a very special place because while Polop counters Corporate Town counters Polop as well because Corporate Town trashes a resource. However, this doesn't work in the Corp's favor at all, because while the runner loses 5 credits for trashing the Corporate Town with Polop, the Corp sadly loses an agenda because they're forced to forfeit an agenda. So whichever way you look at this, the Corp doesn't come out ahead. Glacial archetypes that rely on single assets to keep the entire deck in place are going to fall apart when Polop hits the table. But hey, you say, kill decks should still be fine, shouldn't they? Well, sadly, I hate to break it to you, but that's not the case, and I feel that this is the most unfortunate collateral damage sustained by the introduction of Polop. The fact that you can no longer rely on kill assets is a big deal. Now, because Polop doesn't access the card that's trashed, you simply trash a card. The runner doesn't get 2 agenda points for trashing executives such as Chairman Hero. But still, if you're looking as IG to perform the Chairman Hero Neuro EMP Ronin combo, you can't do it anymore with a Polop out. With a Polop out, your combo will fail and you have to reassemble the combo, hoping that the runner doesn't win the game while you're trying to do so again. And if the runner is running 3 Polops, well, they are virtually invincible to that combo. Zealous Judge is an upcoming card that's also going to be affected. I imagine Corps will wait until the runner decides to run through a Data Raven before resing Zealous Judge. Then that puts the runner on a time bomb. With their remaining clicks, they have to clear the Data Raven tag and go to trash the Zealous Judge. With Polop, this becomes a lot easier because the click compression factor is not as scary, because they can use Polop to trash Zealous Judge, leaving them more than enough time to clear the tag. So quite a lot of kill decks are affected by the existence of Polop, those that rely on assets to get part of the job done. But wait, we are not done yet. Remember how I said that Jackson was immune to Pollock because of its paid speed ability? Well, I was kind of hand-waving right there. In actual fact, Jackson is very much affected by Pollock. It might just be the biggest casualty, simply because it's being played in every single CORP deck right now. Why is it affected? Because, for the most part, Corps do not leave Jackson Howard unres. Usually what Corps do is they res Jackson Howard and then flood their hand with cards so that they can ditch them to archives and then recycle them with Jackson Howard. Now Pollock completely disrupts that. You can fire Pollock before the Corp's discard phase. This leaves the Corp with maybe 8 or 9 cards in hand, of which maybe 4 are agendas. Now they're forced to either hold 4 agendas in hand or pitch 3 agendas into archives, both of which are horrible, horrible situations for the Corp to be in. And of course, they can do it the other way around as well. They can wait for you to discard cards into archives. If you discarded any agendas, they can fire Pollock, which kind of works like Hades Shard, in that it denies the use of your Jackson, and then you run archives to steal the agendas that they intended to recycle with Jackson Howard. It's a very, very scary world for Corps out there right now, with Pollock in play. Because Jackson Howard is no longer as effective as he used to be. You have to respect the power of Pollock. Now that we have gone through the list of Corp archetypes that are affected by Pollock, it's natural to ask ourselves, which existing Corp archetypes are least affected? Well, I think this is our worst nightmare, isn't it? The meta is shifting back to yellow again. Yellow is more favored than ever before! How can this be? But it is. Because the decks that are least affected by Pollock are those that are more reliant on operations than assets and upgrades. It's very natural. So what sort of decks? Any H fast advance is unaffected because Biotic labels an operation, and Sense Sensitivity Grid falls under the immune category when it comes to Pollock. Astro Script is also immune to Pollock. When you have a scored Astro, they can't do anything to hinder your fast advance. Scorch kill decks are also pretty good, because these are based on operations, unlike Ronin, which is an asset-based kill deck. So the most effective Scorch Turf decks right now are those with Breaking News and 24/7s and mid-seasons. Again, yellow decks. Jinteki PE, Cambridge PE is still somewhat effective, I suppose, if you can get a Neuro EMP with Philotic off. Otherwise, if you're relying on Ronin, that's going to be quite hard. Mid-seasons decks are also pretty unaffected. Again, these are decks that are reliant on operations. So New Angelus Soul is actually still pretty well positioned. The reason why I think my Lonely Solar Flare deck worked pretty well was because against a meta full of imps and wizards, having operation-based economy really helps. And once again, operations are not affected by Pollock, making New Angelus Soul all that much more better. But enough about New Angelus Soul. Now we ask ourselves, as the Corp, what can you do to prepare yourself against Political Operative? So let's tackle this problem systematically. I've identified 3 key weakness points, the Achilles heel of Political Operative. First is the fact that it's a resource and a connection. Second is the fact that you require a successful run on HQ before you can install it. Third is that it has a trash cost. So, number 1. The fact that it is a resource means that Wayland is actually pretty decently positioned to deal with it, because it has its own set of resource killing cards such as Contract Killer and Corporate Town, cards that are rather niche but might see more play now that there will be a huge surge in Pollock. The problem is these are really one-for-one trades, because while Contract Killer and Corporate Town kill Pollock, as I mentioned earlier, Pollock kills these as well because they are assets. So it really is a one-for-one trade. Contract Killer is not that bad. It does you set yourself back by a lot if you use Contract Killer, but that just might be the better solution, because as I mentioned earlier, Corporate Town requires an agenda forfeit. Contract Killer will probably set you back maybe your full turn, or maybe less if you're using Dedication Ceremony. But otherwise, it's a way to get rid of that pesky Pollock. The other way is to just do it the traditional way, which is tag the runner, then trash their Pollocks. Again, which faction does tagging the best? The faction that needs it the least. NBN, mid-seasons and breaking news. They don't really need to trash the Pollock though, because most of their plans are not affected by Pollock. So for most of the other CORP archetypes that are affected by Polop, the most likely solution is to attack number 2, which is requiring a successful HQ run. This means icing up HQ against most runners and then playing Crisium Grid in your deck. For 1 influence, it's not too bad. It defends against a whole variety of other nasty cards as well. And being on HQ, it means that it also defends against the most nasty of them, being Account Siphon, Vamp, you name it, the runner's got it. So, Crisium Grid is pretty effective, but it comes with its own caveat. Firstly, you need to find the Crisium Grid before they find their Polop. If they find the Polop first, you're in a lot of trouble, especially if your opponent is criminal. Because once they get the first Polop installed, they can use their Polop to trash your Crisium if you res it. This means that if the Polop comes out first, they can siphon you blindly, even with upgrades on HQ. If you res the Crisium Grid, they Polop it off, and the siphon goes through, and you are a very sad puppy. You have to find the Crisium Grid first, and on top of that, you have to pre-res the Crisium Grid. Even if it looks like an innocuous HQ run, even if there are no agendas in hand, you res the Crisium Grid, force them to trash it. Otherwise, if you don't, they get to install their Polop. Then if you res your Crisium Grid later to defend against a siphon, they still have the Polop to deal with you. So it becomes really an arms race. Can they find their Polop first, or will you get your Crisium first? You better get your Crisium first, because otherwise, not only will HQ be vulnerable to siphons and the like, your remotes will also be vulnerable to Caprice trashing, Ash trashing, and whatever defensive upgrades you might have. Number 3. At the end of the day, Polop is a finite resource. The runner can only use Polop so many times. This is something I kind of glossed over. I made it seem like a doomsday scenario, but in fact, this finite use of Polop is really what will keep Polop in check. The fact that the runner cannot use it willy-nilly. What this means for the CORP is that even if the deck is not tagged against Polop, they still have possible counterplay. All you need to do is to make sure that you have more defensive upgrades than the runner has Polops. Imagine a food court server with an unres Caprice Ash. You're allowed to have multiple Caprices in the same server, they just cannot be res at the same time. So imagine the runner makes a run on that fortified server. You res the first Caprice. If they use their only Polop against that Caprice, you still have the second Caprice and the Ash to keep the runner out. And this is probably the best way forward. To over-prepare your scoring server against Polop. Now this has a very interesting ramification for deck design. Seeing this means that you want to have lots and lots of defensive upgrades in your deck so that you can draw them reliably to outmuscle the Polop. So in a regular food courts deck nowadays, post most wanted list, you can only afford the influence for 1 Caprice. That is not going to be anywhere near enough against Polop. So this discourages you from importing Caprice into HB, because with only a single copy of Caprice that is vulnerable to Polop, why play Caprice in HB? Play Caprice in Jinteki instead. Maybe import HB Ice instead. That way you still get access to 3 copies of Caprice and 3 copies of Marcus Betty, and however many ashes you're willing to spend influence on. That's a much more viable solution to deal with Polop. Amidst all the unwanted and unnecessary collateral damage suffered by most tier 2 assets and upgrades, I feel that this is one shining star that comes with the introduction of Polop. The fact that high influence upgrades and assets are discouraged from being exported to other factions. An upgrade as powerful as Caprice Nisei was never meant to leave its faction, because it was designed with the porous Jinteki Ice in mind. And now we have Polop to reinforce this by discouraging other factions from importing that Caprice Nisei due to its heavy influence cost. So I think this is a good place to stop for this video. There's a lot more I can cover about Polop, including how it can be used in the runner side and which archetypes can make use of Polop the best. I might cover that in a separate video, so you viewers, please leave a comment in the comment section telling me whether you enjoyed what I presented today or what I can further improve on. But in summary, I do feel that Polop is the clot of Mumbat cycle. It is going to have a huge impact on both runner and corp decks and archetypes. It's going to warp the meta and shake it up. People are going to experiment with Polop. People are going to play counters to Polop. People are going to play around people playing around Polop. And when the dust settles, when all is said and done, when regional season hits, I predict yellow will stand up a cut above the rest, as it always has, and as it always will be, because it's the least affected by Polop. Thanks for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.